Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all. Welcome to day number 3 of the NCAC Soccer Hub online debates. This is our last day. This is panel number 5. We will try to answer the questions: should coaches recruit players based on running speed? And for that, we invited Daniel Barreira, Gabriela Trichilo, and also Richard Bucciarelli. Before I introduce them into this discussion, I would like to ask you please to introduce on the chat box some information about yourselves, the country that you are based in, and also some information about your job, so we can also adapt a bit our conversation to your special needs. Also, if everything is okay with the video and the audio, please click on the like button. Do it now, please. As you know, this is a live event, so you will be able to ask questions to our speakers. You just have to introduce the question on the chat box, and we will select some of the questions to introduce them to our speakers. So I'm going to introduce today's speakers into this conversation. Here is Gabriela. Hello, Gabriela.
Hello.
Hello. So Daniel Barreira. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, Ricardo. Hello, Gabriela.
Hello.
And finally, Richard. Richard, thank you very much. And the panel is yours. See you in about 45 minutes. Okay, Richard? Bye-bye.
Great. All right. Thanks. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon, I guess, to both of you, because I know it's the afternoon in Toronto. And I guess I can say good evening to Danielle. Maybe before we get started with the topic, I thought Danielle first, and then you, Gabriela. If you can just tell whoever's listening a little bit about yourself, maybe your background working in football, and what you're doing right now.
You can start, Gabriela.
Okay.
All right.
So I have the last couple of years been working with Ontario Soccer as a regional manager for player development. Mostly or primarily within the grassroots age groups, and I get the pleasure of working with clubs across the province. I've grown up and played in Ontario from I think 3 years old, and worked in Canada and the US, and I hold a UFA license, and I'm trained as a Canadian A license as well, and super excited about this topic. I think it's a personal one for me, so that's a little bit about me.
Okay, Danielle.
I'm scout of international scout of Football Club Barcelona in the past, and professor at Faculty of Sports, University of Porto. In the past, I was coach, first league coach, second league coach, youth coach, match analyst of national teams and clubs of the first division. Also, I was a coordinator on some youth teams. So these are my tasks I did in my past in soccer.
Okay, fantastic. Looks like we temporarily lost Gabriela, but maybe I'll start with Danielle, and hopefully she can come back on soon. Oh, maybe she's back. Okay, she's back. All right. So the topic today is maybe something a little bit controversial. It's an interesting discussion for sure. Should coaches recruit players based on running speed? And I want to start maybe just to get an idea of the importance of running speed in football and soccer, and maybe we can go from there. So either one, let's say Danielle or Gabriela, can you let us know a little bit about what do you think about the importance of running speed in our sport?
We start?
Yeah, sure. Danielle, get us going.
Okay. I think I see football as a tactical game. I see tactical as a super dimension, like a dimension that all of the other dimensions should respect and understand how to play in the question of decision making. So physical is very important, but physical, in my perspective, is tactical. technical is tactical, mental is tactical, decision making is tactical also. So running is very important, but by itself, it's not enough to see if a player runs very fast, if he's a good player. Of course, that for me is an important factor. Also, it depends of the positional status of the player, but most important for me, I will talk not so long because I think we have a discussion about this with the questions. But the first thing I want to say is that running is an important factor. We should not recruit players based on one characteristic, or two or three. We recruit players based on different aspects and all related between them. So, and speed is one of them. Not a requirement. We don't exclude the player because he's not so fast like the other, but if he's faster, is a good characteristic.
Okay, so that's a good start. So basically, everything needs to be related to tactics.
Yes.
And you would say speed is an important characteristic, but it's not necessarily something that you would exclude a player based on not having a lot of speed. So Gabriela, can you jump in there and give us your perspective?
For sure. I mean, I agree. Obviously, there's so many different factors that you have to consider when you're looking at player selection. I think it's also super important to remember the age groups of which you're talking about when you're talking about selecting or recruiting players based on running speed. If you look at what some of the science says, I think in some of the studies that you even published and co-authored recently, you talk about just, high level players and top league level players, being significantly faster than the levels beneath them. And so if we look at what science says when it talks about selecting players or looking at players that are fast, I think it's a really good factor to keep into consideration that, players will be successful if they are fast. So again, how does that relate to our environment and the players that we're recruiting within our playing circles or realm, and then we can make that decision. But I do agree there are so many factors that go into the decision-making process for sure.
Great, and I think sometimes maybe coaches look at this question or this topic as if it's kind of binary, like you either want to recruit a player who's fast but tactically weak, or you want a player who's tactically very strong and not fast. And I don't know, Danielle, is it fair to say that ideally you'd like to have a player who is tactically strong and has a certain level of speed, rather than thinking of it as if it's one or the other? What do you think?
Yes, for me, there are three types of speed. The physical speed, like the running intensity, the different intensities. We see that in time motion analysis, accelerations, decelerations, etc. And mental speed is how he thinks. If he's faster, he's thinking of the game. And then I call this movement speed. It's like the way he's coordinated, the speed he moves is segments, like the player to make 1-against-1, he needs to be fast in his legs. The central defender needs to be not rigid, it's like agility, but not only that. So it's not like agility or coordination. It's like something else. So when we talk about speed, we should see these three kinds of speed, not only the physical speed. Okay, and then there are some other concepts I think is very important. When Gabriela, I totally agree with Gabriela about the top players are fast in this kind of three types of speed I talked now. But most important is to see when they are fast. When, because when we go to play with our friends, they are fast all the game, because they don't know when to be slow and when to be fast. They need to manage the rhythm of the game. when to be fast and when to be slow. When they need to be fast, they are really fast. They are really fast deciding, fast executing, playing, like making a pass, and then they are fast physically also. So I think that is very important to know if the player understands when he should accelerate and be really fast. And I think that most important that research need to do is not to seeing if the top players are faster or not faster, is to see if they are faster, obviously, but if they understand when they need to be fast or not. Because when we see time motion analysis, we have Lionel Messi in a game against Real Madrid. Barca won 5-0, and Messi ran 5 kilometers, and even not so fast. And we if you analyze only the speed, we say this player didn't play, and he was the best player in the game. So I think we need to understand that this kind of speeds we need to interpret, and how to analyze this kind of players, because it is not so simple. This question, this debate, this discussion, obviously that if you ask this to 99% of the persons, they will tell you, no, it's not important. But then we need to go deeper. We need to go in interpreting this kind of idea in a more depth way, because this is not so simple as we think.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think you speak about the 3 different types of speed, and it's very easy to analyze and assess whether or not a player can run fast. That's easy to do. It's possible.
Richard, let me interrupt you. Sorry. In resume, for example, if you have a central defender, for me, a central defender needs to be fast, because if I am a coach, I like my team to play in the offensive midfield. But imagine that a coach wants a central defender to play in the back of his team, in the defensive midfield and near his goal. He doesn't need to be fast in 30 meters or 40 meters. He needs to be fast in 5 meters, accelerations. So it's important to understand even that there are different types of players, because if you have a player that is not so fast, but he's faster thinking the game, he will win half of a second. And then if he is fast in coordination, like moving his body, he will also win half of a half second. And then he will win 1 second. And then the other player is slow thinking the game, slow moving his body, and he's faster in running speed. So these kind of speeds we cannot separate, because if we are good anticipating the game, you will win some seconds, or at least 1 second, or half of a second. And then if he's not so fast moving his body, and he's fast in 30 meters, maybe he will have some other characteristics. So we cannot recruit a player based only on running speed, but it helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I've spoken to Gabriela about this before, that, the differences that you can achieve even with training for running speed are usually less than half a second, and certainly less than 1 second. So if, as you said, Danielle, if you have a player who's faster, with mental speed and faster with coordination, and they're gaining half a second to a second, then there's a very good chance that they'll be actually faster than a player who can run faster but is slower in mental or coordination. So I'd like to maybe to either one of you, maybe Gabriela, you can chime in, because as I was mentioning prior, that it's easy enough to see whether a player can run fast, but it may be a little bit more difficult to determine which players are fastest mentally and which players are fastest moving their body or with coordination. So what do you think about that, Gabriela? And how do you, or how have some of the coaches or sports scientists you've worked with assessed those other types of speed, mental speed and coordination?
I think if we, again, okay, if you were to ask us, I think both Danielle and myself, if you were to ask us, you know, which player would you choose, Messi or Ronaldo, I feel like we would both ask you back, can we have them both, right? Like, I mean, who wouldn't want that ideal player, right? And even as many as you possibly can. But again, I think having the conversation about top level players, for me, I feel feels unrealistic, right? I mean, and even the ability to be able to test players' running speed and their ability to mentally respond or react in a game situation is really unrealistic to, I think, the average coach that I get to talk to on a day-to-day basis, right? And so one of the things I think is super important for coaches to be able to understand is the demand of the game as it relates to your environment, right? So what are the demands when it comes to the opponents that you're facing, that you may know that you're facing? I know Danielle's obviously an expert in scouting, so he may he of course knows more about this than I do, but I mean, understanding your opponent and what you need to be able to deal with. We don't have the ability to drop a couple bucks and buy the player of our dreams. We really do need to kind of create them, right? So I think being able to assess a player's personality, their tenacity, you know, their stamina and motivation is super important as a coach, and being able to select players that really do fit into your team environment to kind of shape a formation or a style of play that you'd like to play. And that may mean that you want to play fast, and that may be the only important thing for you, right? You may want to do everything fast, you know, and that could mean that you just never have the ball. And so you're running around everywhere, but you don't have the ball at your feet. So when it comes to our realistic environment, I think a lot of it's emotional. It's a feeling. It's a you know, the tingle that you get when you see the player that is going to kind of mold into what you think their potential is in our realistic environment. I understand there's, of course, ways to look at reaction speed. Of course, there's physical literacy exercises that you can work on with kids at younger ages to see reaction time and ability to even decision make. Those are great ways to realistically test if players are able to make a decision quick. And of course, you can have basic running activities where you can see whether or not a player is quick and if they have that genetic speed. And whether or not it's something that you need to develop in your environment. And that may only be another quick step on your opponent, but that quick step could mean obviously something pretty big for the average player. So I think it's super important to know the demands of the game and to select your players appropriately based on that. And again, it comes down to the emotion or the way that the coach wants to play. I think if I had to make the selection between a player who's going to go quick and the player who's going to play smart, for myself, I will play or pick that player who's smart, who's got that tenacity, who's got the drive and the grit and, you know, something to prove. Because I think that quality and that personality is going to have the compensation effect, as some would call it. To be able to outplay and outperform a player who may be faster and maybe had things a little easier growing up.
Okay, so lot to talk about there. I wanted to go back to a point that Danielle made a little while ago, which was just about sort of let's say the requirements of certain positions in general on the pitch. And then I know Gabriela touched on this as well, so I'd like you and Danielle mentioned it, the idea that based on the way, let's say, your coaching philosophy, your style of play, your tactics, how you like to use, you know, I know Danielle, you mentioned center backs, or how you like to use fullbacks. So can you comment, let's say Danielle will start on let's say some requirements of specific positions in terms of all three types of speed. And then maybe, you know, you gave one personal example of a center back. If either one of you want to give some other examples of, you know, where in which areas of the field in your ideal team would you like to have better running speed, better mental speed, better speed of coordination? I'd like to talk a little more about that. So Danielle, if you want to get started.
Richard, football for me is a game of spaces. That is has three macro structures: time, space, and task. And all of the three together make organization. Is the super macro structures. So it's very important to understand this kind of things, that we are only talking about mental speed, coordination, and then there is one macro structure that's very important, is cushion. How he perform when he has the ball, or how he perform when he does not has the ball. For example, a tackle or interception, or a defensive position, or I don't know, like a duel, aerial duel, how he win the position. So this is very important, how he perform, not only how he manage time and space, because speed, running speed is what? Is time and space. He has to run more space in less time to be faster, no?
Yeah.
And then this is some other, like handball and basketball. And then he has a ball in his foot. What he does with the ball, how he does, how he finds spaces to manage that. For example, a winger. Sometimes the winger need to go in the last third of the field. It's very important to not be there in the defensive line. He need to go there, to pass there, but not to be there. And then, if he's fast to find that space in the correct moment, he will get advantage of his speed. If he's not smart, as Gabriela told, he won't get advantage of his speed. He will be only a speed player, not a good player. Understand? But he's a slow player. He's smart. He gets in the correct place to accelerate, but he's not fast. He won't be a great player because he won't be getting advantage of his space he could, and then he need to adapt his kind of thinking of the game. And then he can be, because he's smart, he can understand how he can manage his characteristics, because this is a very important thing. The great player, the top player, have conscience of his limitations, because the top player is intelligent player. In his conscience, he have conscience of what he can do and what he cannot do. Okay, and then it is we have some characteristics of, for example, a lateral defender. Most of the lateral defenders need to be fast. Is a good characteristic, because he need to make, in a good team, he need to make 40 meters, 15 meters in a fast way. Okay, but then if you look to a central defender, he need to make sprints in acceleration 5 meters, 10 meters.
Yeah.
In the top teams like Manchester City or Barcelona, they need to make 40 meters. But in most of the teams, he can need to make most 15 meters. And then you have a striker. You have different types of striker. If you see Luis Suarez or Benzema, and you can compare with Lewandowski, they need different types of speed, and they belong to the same position. So what I can say about this, Richard, is that the top players need to have characteristics, and these characteristics are the characteristics that all of them have, like unity characteristics. Top striker has some characteristics, like and a winger. Ronaldo, Messi, Neymar, they are very different, but they have similar characteristics. They make, and are these characteristics that make them great players as wingers. And then they have characteristics that make them different. And these characteristics that make them different tell the scouts and coaches, okay, this is a great winger for my team, for my context. And this, for example, Robin is a great player for Bayern Munich, but is not a great player, for example, for Real Madrid. I don't know. I'm talking about abstract, okay?
Yeah.
It's an example, stupid example. But like Neymar is a great player for Barcelona, not a great player for PSG. Why? Because the game is a game of interactions. And interactions need to be with a lot of synchrony. And this is very important to understand. So there are characteristics that make them great players. And we need to know them because youth coaches need to coach them like that. And we are talking about mental characteristics, tactical, technical, and physical characteristics. Like Gabriela was telling, to know the demands of the game. It's very important. And then we need to coach the players not to eliminate the characteristics that make them different and train the unity characteristics and make the characteristics that make them different better, to training them to improve those characteristics. So I can tell you some characteristics of, for me, a top player, like a lateral, midfielder, striker. We need to know what they need to have to be a top player. And there is a work we made in Faculty of Sport, very interesting about that. A Brazilian student, and he defined the top players of each position, like players that were FIFA. I don't know how we say in English. FIFA voted in those players to be, for example, the best 10 players with more votes. Okay, in the last 10 years, and then he saw some videos of those players, and then he categorized some behaviors, and then he asked top coaches about what they think that is important or not so important, and then he defined characteristics of a striker and a winger and a midfielder, and even, for example, Xabi Alonso is very similar to Busquets and Casemiro, and they are, if you look to them, they are very different. No, they have similar things, and this is very important to understand a great player. And most important, like Gabriela was saying also, is, okay, they can't be perfect. There are no perfect players. The most perfect players are Ronaldo and Messi. They won a lot of prizes, no? In the last 10 years, 15 years, they were the best players in the world. So even them, they are not perfect. That's why Ronaldo and Messi train every day to be better. But they won't be perfect because there are no perfect players. But there are more perfect players for each context. And because they are different, understand? So when we are talking about one factor like speed or technique or crosses, it's not enough to understand one factor because they are in interactions.
I'd like to just jump on that if that's okay. I think one of the things that you mentioned was just about, training players for their, let's say, deficiencies or improving their deficiencies in a way, not obviously exactly word for word what you're saying, but training the players to improve the things that they need to improve. And so, I mean, understanding the limitations that players have, and then training and exhausting the potential that they have through both competition and training environments, and being able to say as a coach that I have exhausted every possible scenario. I've put them through every single possible scenario that could come up in both training and competition, and I've been able to see whether or not this player can reach this potential or have reached their potential, to say whether or not this player can compete with some of the faster players on the field. those are important questions to ask yourself as a coach as to whether or not you have exhausted all of those scenarios for a player to go through, both in training and in competition, to see whether or not you can make that selection of a player and they'll fit into your environment, and whether or not they're fast or slow, they'll be able to either compensate or really step up to the occasion, and either improve on their weaknesses or just eliminate the weakness by making that quicker step through commitment and training. I think it's super important to understand the limitations of the player, and to be able to say as a coach that I've exhausted every possible approach to make this player reach his or her potential. So that's super important, because let's say a player has the ability to technically be efficient, let's say, as opposed to receiving the ball, taking a touch, and looking for progressive play, which in a lot of coaches' eyes would be, the ideal scenario. Maybe that player isn't taking the touch to look open to progressive play. Maybe they're just redirecting to progressive play. And that now means, midfielders played a ball into the box for the striker to run onto, that type thing, right? So as opposed to taking 1 second, you're taking half a second to do something that a player who may be quick, but is a little bit more lax, because they do have that, maybe genetic speed that they've been able to rely on. So there's so many factors, but you as a coach need to be able to exhaust all of those things to be able to make the proper selection, whether or not I should go with the player who's faster, or the player who's smarter, or even just the one who's more hungry.
Great, and I think like if I can summarize a little bit and maybe paraphrase a bit, is so Danielle, you have certain kind of common characteristics that are required of the game and are required of certain positions, and those, I think it's very important for a coach to understand those common or shared characteristics, and then coaches have their own preference and maybe based on the style of play, and of course you mentioned different strikers that have some similarities and some differences, so you have to know the common characteristics, and that's going to factor into your selection. And then you need to know some of the, let's say, specific characteristics for what you're looking for. And I know Gabriela gave some good specific examples. So of course we can't just say, again, the topic of the debate here, should we recruit players based on speed? It's too simple, right? It's not something that we can say yes or no. Maybe the answer is it depends, and it depends on those common characteristics and also on those unique characteristics. So Gabriela touched on something which I'd like to move to a bit, which is about the idea of training players to improve on maybe some of the things that they have limitations on. And does it make sense to select a player that has certain limitations that you think you have a high potential to improve, versus another player who has limitations, but you don't think you can improve them so much with training? So would you select a player that has a greater potential to improve over another player who maybe is worse or better or whatever, but doesn't have the same potential to improve? Do you look at specific ways that you can train or develop players when you're selecting them? What do you think?
If I may, I think for me, given the age groups that we're talking about, 13 plus, a huge factor in my decision would be the conversation I have with the player, the honest conversation that I have with the player. Because the reaction or the conversation we have, and whether or not it's honest, and whether or not a player commits and shows the drive to improve, is going to make a big difference as to whether or not I would select them. Because whether or not I feel that I can, improve a player isn't so important to me, because that's my job as a coach, right? And if I can't, then am I a coach? Can I affect a player in a positive way to improve their deficiencies? But so that conversation I have with the player is going to have a huge factor in my decision, and whether or not they're truly and wholeheartedly committed to actually making a change. And even that may mean giving them the opportunity to show me the change that they're able to make. That would be an importance for me.
Okay, Danielle, anything to add there?
Yes, I totally agree. I think training has a transformation process. Training is the only way we have to transform the player. Transform, in other words, to develop players. But firstly, before the selection of the players, we need to develop the players. What can I say with this? You can only identify the players if you see them playing. If the work during this process is good, if he's playing in a good position that he feel good, if they are making a good work with this player, you can identify the player, because if you didn't see the player playing, you cannot identify. So the selection process is directly linked with development process. And then we need to think, but this player has these limitations. But how much you can improve these limitations? And there are different ways you can train, but there are characteristics of the players you cannot train in a big way. For example, speed. You cannot transform a slow speed in a very fast player. You cannot. So if you have a player that is not fast in running speed, physical speed, you cannot transform the player to be very fast. Correct? You can.
Very correct. I've been working on that for 15 years.
You can improve. You can improve the coordination. You can improve the strength of the gluteus, of the quadricep. You can improve some things, but he won't be very fast. He can improve. So this is one characteristic that it's not. You cannot train it a lot. You can improve, and this. If you can improve a little bit, it's very important. There are some characteristics you cannot improve also. Some is for example, aggressiveness. A player that is not aggressive in a good way, in a positive sense, of course, he won't be very aggressive. He can improve, but not in a very big way. For example, a goalkeeper that is not so good in an aerial game going out of his goal. You cannot improve in a big way his courage, his like mental, no, his courage, his comfort going out and jumping in the middle of 10 players, for example. The other thing, everything we can transform the player, but we need, because I was coach for 13 years, and I get the idea. I have the idea about what is more trainable. We can train more or not, and it is very important to recruit players. For example, for me, if we have a central defender that it's not fast, and it's difficult to recruit a player like this, because in a top team like Manchester City, if he's not fast physically, even being mental, deciding, anticipating, and with his movements fast, if he's not physical or fast, he has an handicap, big limitation. Understand?
Won't be able to keep up with the fast strikers, right? Yeah.
Understand? Because he has 50 meters behind him, between the goalkeeper and the central defenders. He has 50 meters, 45 meters. So if he's not fast, even anticipating, even being coordinated, it's very difficult to recruit a player like this. If you see the central defenders of Manchester City, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Juventus, they play far from their goal. You can see that they are fast, all of them. Even I'm talking about physically in the running speed. Okay, this is a position that it's very important to have speed, and it is trainable. We can train this, but it's not in a very, very, very big dimension, because it's like it depends of genetics. You know that, no? You work with that.
Yeah.
If you have I have a professor in faculty, a colleague that we ask them. we ask him how you recruit athletes for you for speed and 100 speed meters, 100 meter speed. He told me the player that has the big S, a bigger S.
The size of the hamstring tendon, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
Gluteo. Yes, that's his criterion.
Yeah.
So because he knows that he cannot transform a player, the athlete that it takes 50 seconds in a athlete that takes 11 seconds in 100 meters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is very important for a coach and for a scout to understand what he can change in the player and how much you can change. For example, if you say to me, a player that has limitations playing with both feet, with both feet or both foot, I don't know, sorry.
Yeah,
like left foot and right foot. It is you can train this a lot. We made a study and we put players improving the laterality for 6 months in small-sided games. They improve, they duplicate the efficacy playing with the no preferred foot. You can train a lot these characteristics. It is very important for a player, for example, a midfielder to play. If he does not play very good with, for example, left foot and his right foot, he will have a lot of limitations because he will lose a lot of opportunities to play. Another thing that is very, very easy to train is, for example, the coordination in defensive line, how to making cover, this is tactics. You can train this a lot. This is like thinking of the game. So as a coach and as a scout, you need to separate which characteristics you can train more and less. Because when you recruit the players to top players, and I believe if you know some people that believe in training, I'm one of them. I believe a lot in training, a lot, I believe, but I'm reasonable also. I know that some characteristics, you cannot improve them 100%.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. It's kind of what I was hinting at is that it's really important to know, maybe even to know the science about which of these characteristics are trainable and which are not. And I mean, I've made a lot of points about how difficult it is to train for speed, and that's actually a fantastic example of another characteristic, Danielle, about like the ability to use both feet, that maybe some coaches don't know how trainable that is. Maybe some coaches don't know. I hear a lot sometimes here in Canada about coaches thinking that tactical understanding isn't or is difficult to train. It's either a player understands something or they never will. And you're giving a good point that's not true at all, right? So and when you're selecting, you have to maybe kind of prioritize your selection on the characteristics that are not as trainable. And we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm gonna throw it out to maybe to Gabriela quickly, and Danielle, you can jump in. But Gabriela, anything you want to comment on it? Let's say about the differences in men's and women's football about this topic. I know you've got quite a bit of experience, at the higher levels of the women's game here in Ontario and Canada as well. And can you comment on that a bit?
I think when we're talking about running speed in this topic, I don't think there's much of a difference. I think we have to look at it in a way the same. And so these technical deficiencies and whether or not we can improve them, those are all the same conversations that we should be having for both men and women's players. And then, I mean, just in addition to that, I think, know your limitations as a coach too. If you know that you're not able to put in the work to help that player, Danielle's a coach who likes to train, right? I mean, if you're not the coach who likes to train, then don't select the player that needs the work. And so either be willing to put in the work to help that player reach the potential, or be that coach that just picks the stronger, faster, taller player. I don't know. I mean, it's a lot to say in 30 seconds, I guess, but
sure. Yeah, well, maybe it's not good to be a coach that doesn't like to train, right?
Probably not.
Yeah. Okay. I did see, I tried to get to some questions, and we did have one from Abdul Rahman Ali, a little off topic, but he asked, is nutrition and diet at the age of 14 years old? Maybe is nutrition and diet needed at the age of 14? I'll answer it quickly, just specifically about nutrition and diet. Any high level athlete needs to think about their diet for sure. This is a little bit off topic, but if you have players that have bad habits with nutrition and diet when they're 14, 15, they're going to struggle when they get older. What do you think? Do you agree with me?
I disagree with you, Rich. I think it's important from they're very little. I'll tell you why. Because if they don't, obviously you know that. I mean, if they don't develop good habits from when they're young, when your years are over, it is very hard to have some level of normal nutrition and diet. So I think it's important from when they're little ones.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna ask Danielle anything further to add, and then maybe we'll try to summarize and wrap it up in the next few minutes. Anything further to add, Danielle?
No, I think that that this was a great discussion we have here about a very important topic. Important thing for me is like football does not follow the Olympic thing that people were saying. The faster, stronger, and with more high. So because this is not what football follows. Football needs to be more intelligent. So. But the problem here is how we measure intelligence. So that's the point, and that's the point we should understand, that we should believe in the transformation of the players. That's answering what you told before about the coaches that don't believe on to changing the understanding of the game. This is the first reason to not be a coach, because if you don't believe on the development of the player in this kind of characteristics, you cannot be a coach. Because the problem is that if you are a coach, you need to believe on that, and then you need to know how to develop this kind of characteristics. And there is not one way to do that. But if you don't give the proper stimulus for each player, and when I talk about each player, this is very important to get this idea. Each player has his limitations and his difficulties, and sometimes we recruit players, and the coaches go there and train the players, and they say he's not a good player. No, this player has some limitations, but he has some other strengths. And you need to understand how to develop the limitations, improve the bad things transform to good things, and then not to look only to the bad things. Okay, so and then another thing that the coach need to do is to find, for example, the correct position for him in the field, to get advantage of his strength and to hide the limitations. And when you hide the limitations, you can train the limitations to get strength also. So this is, for me, a coach. And in these kind of situations, like Gabriela said, nutrition is a question of habits. But the way the players train is also an habit. It's also an habit. And these kind of things to train is an habit that the players need to have and need to win, to get, since they are very, very young. And the coaches need to be very good coaches in the youth to get them with these kind of habits. And usually we look to the youth coaches as not so important. No, it's wrong. They are very, very, very important, because they pass habits and conditions for them to be great players. If they don't exist, if they are not good, the players won't be also so good as they could be.
Yes, and youth
training, and I believe in that recruitment should be directed linked with training process.
Great, and I would say, you know, youth players are the ones that have the most potential to improve in any area, right? So of
Yeah.
course the coaches at that level have maybe the most important job. I'm going to summarize very quickly the answer to the question: should coaches recruit players based on running speed? I'm going to say it depends. It might be yes, it might be no. We talked about 3 different types of speed that are important, which are physical, mental, and movement speed. And actually, I like maybe Danielle's other point that football, soccer is a game about time, space, and task. And players need to be able to execute within all of those areas. You know, both of us, Gabriela, you know, we've talked about, you know, we want to think about our own opinion and our own feeling about a player. What do we, you know, what are the common characteristics that are needed in football, and what are the things that we want as a coach to get out of them? And in the end, it has to all come down to training. You have to know what you can train and what you can't, and you have to know the limitations of the players that you have and see how you can train to make them better. So we'll leave it at that.
Guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Richard. We will start the next panel in about 10 minutes, so I have to leave and prepare things. Guys, thank you very much, and see you soon.
All right.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Richard. The pleasure, Gabriela, and
Thank you.
thanks for the invitation and success for all.
Okay. All right. Boa noche.
Boa noite.
Obrigado.